Evening and welcome. Tonight is Monday, September 11th, 2017. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. It is 7 o'clock p.m. We will call the meeting to order. All please join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everyone should have a copy of the agenda in front of them. Are there any changes or corrections to the agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up, we have our minutes from the August 28th, 2017 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 through 6. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Next, we will address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? If so, raise your hand, and we won't do that right now, but when it comes to 2, 3 of you? Okay, I'm assuming, is it all on the keeping of honeybees? All right, okay. When that comes up, we will address you at that time. Thank you. Next, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any item whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move on. Next, we have the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins on detail on page 7 and goes through page 7J, with the resolution appearing on page 8, and includes the following temporary employee appointment: Leah Knutson for temporary part-time third floor assistant coordinator, and the regular schedule of disbursements for August 24th, 2017 through September 6th, 2017. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the consent agenda, please, call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Kerwin.
Aye.
Mayor Zena.
Aye.
Councilmember Coleman.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next, we have unfinished business, which there is none, so we will move right into new business. And first up, we have the 2017 preliminary tax levy, and Paula is here tonight.
Mayor and Council, tonight we are here to set the preliminary levy as we do each year here in September. And just a reminder that this is a discussion about the city taxes. The portion on your property tax statement is only the city share, whereas there's other agencies that are on your property tax statement as well. We are needing to certify this preliminary levy to the county auditor by the end of September, at which time in December we will have a final levy, and that levy determined at that point can be lower than today's levy or equal to, but not higher. On page 18, we do have a calculation for the tax levy and what it includes. We have about $208,318 increase in the tax levy for 2018. In that, it includes about an additional $50,000 of the operations of the library. We also have a small amount of $4,800 that is necessary for additional debt. And then we have about $203,513 going to general fund operations. This levy is going to change your tax rate from last year's tax rate of 49.09 to 51.64. And as we talked in our prior discussions as well, any change in this levy of $10,000 is going to equal to a 0.2 either way, up or down, if you were to change or adjust this levy. Remind you too that we have no inclusion of
levy for operations of the community center. We do have it on the debt service, but not in your day-to-day operations of the community center. And if I can take just a minute to talk about market values and how they convert to your property tax statements. Quick and easy one, market value of a parcel times the state rate, tax rate classifications, whether you're commercial, residential, that type of thing. That multiplied out is equal to your tax capacity. And that's what the city uses to determine what our tax rate is, depending on what our levy amount is compared to the tax capacity. So again, at this point, we're at a 51.64. A home with $150,000 value that did not change tax value or market value from 2017. For the proposed levy, we would have a $32.22 increase from 2017 to 2018. That's on a $150,000 home. So on a $250,000 business, you're looking at a possible $108.47 per year increase for this levy. So if we can talk a little bit of how we got to this budget, we can talk about the general fund. In 2017, we are proposing that, or projecting that our expenditures over revenues are going to be greater than what we had anticipated in 2017. A large part of this is due to the fact that the building permits that were anticipated have not come in 17 due to the state legislature delaying some bonding and other things. Those projects are more likely to happen in 2018. So that was a large value that we have deferred from 17 to 18. In addition, we also had expenditures of an additional $110,000 of sidewalks that were put in place in 2017. And so you'll see that additional expense that shows up where we have the $601,091 deficit in 2017. Again, this can change throughout the end of the year, but that's our best projection for the plan. In 2018, our fund balance reserve is increasing to a 50.8% of expenditures. This means that we have funded 50.8% of what our expenditures are planned to be in 2018. As you know, our fund balance policy is to keep that number in between 35 and 50. So some of the expenditures that are showing our increase in 2018 to include our cost of a total of $200,195. Excuse me. The anticipated health insurance cost of about $100,000. We also have some wages of $140,000, which includes the full year value of a couple additional positions that were not here full 12 months in 2017. We also have $39,000 of additional street maintenance that will be worked on. And we also have $10,000 of park design that we are continuing to work with Damian Farber on our park system. On page 10 and 11, there's also some bullet points of other operational changes that we have from 2017 to 18. One item department is the senior center coordinator position. We did terminate our contract with Nicollet County and restructured that department. So overall, the net change is about the same as what we've done in the past. It does show that the expenditures are higher because we've also included some revenues in the revenue section. We have some building repairs at the municipal building. We have a fire department plan of setting aside $7,500 per year to allow for the recertification of equipment, or the repurchase of equipment that has not been able to be recertified because of the requirements. We have $2,500 allocated for the third floor at the youth center. We also have additional revenues again in 2018 for building revenues, the inspection fees. We have allocated a greater share of franchise fees to the general fund and the public access fund, so that will generate about a $35,000 additional revenue. And then we also anticipate about $10,000 increase in fees in the Recreation Department. That will be in our fee schedules that we approve here in December. Local government aid increased $76,201. Our health insurance renewal is a 15.2% increase, and we have wage increases of under 3%. Some of the tools that we indicate here on page 13, as we've done in the past, we have a allocation for a transfer from the enterprise funds to the general fund. And so it's 6.5% of your sales are receipted into the general fund. As we have in the past, the fire relief has a worksheet that is presented to the state annually, and it indicates whether or not the municipal entity needs to help fund the fire relief pensions. And again, for this year, we have zero levy for that needs. Again, local government aid has been certified, and we have got an increase for the 2017 of $76,201. We have also planned to apply for a grant for a fire truck chassis. And so the 10% match, which is $60,000, we are anticipating that funding come out of the fire fund that we have set aside for equipment. Our fire calls and fees collected on those are collected in a fund for the fire department in which we allocate for equipment. And so this is an appropriate use of that $60,000. We are also anticipating an equipment certificate of $305,000. This is proposed to purchase a tandem dump truck, replace a pickup, and also do some repair and maintenance of $50,000 at the pool. Some of the other things that are good things to point out too is in 2018 you do have an approved rate increase on the electric fund, and so that is something coming up for you, as well as we will be bringing you the refuse budget, which I anticipate that also having somewhat of an increase in that for 2018. So we've talked a lot about what the budget includes. Let me tell you a few of the things that it doesn't include. Again, as we have talked in previous meetings, we have an Amoresco project going on, which is going to be some improvements for lighting and some equipment at the wastewater treatment plant. Those costs are going to be bonded for, and the repayment of that bond will be coming from the wastewater and the electric funds, as those are the utilities that will be seeing the results of the improvements and the savings on our energy. The sidewalk plan has been, again, we had an additional $110,000 in 2017. We had omitted it from a levy increase in 2018. And as we've talked in the prior discussions, there are some of these items that you may choose to use from our fund balance reserves that we are showing here in 2018. That is that $600,000 that we've spoke of in the past. That is due to one-time revenues, as we've talked about building permits, wanting to associate this with more of one-time expenditures so that the operations aren't hindered as far as trying to fund those operations on a year-to-year basis. The pavilion, you received a $200,000 grant of about $1 million project, and so the additional funds required for that is not in this plan. Township Road 361 to the west of the new high school. Community Spirit Park deficit, and any city building or field houses that have been discussed in the past. So none of those, again, are part of this budget, but again, they can be talked about at a later date when we do approve a budget in December. The library fund is on page 21. It is showing that there's a $50,000 increase in the levy. Programs and services for the library in 2018 are going to remain the same as what they did in 2017. This is using up reserves of about 58,000 and is reducing our reserve balance down to about 2.4%. So this again is not a fund balance that we want to retain. We would need to increase that. And so future discussions to get on the library services and the funding sources will be continued to be talked about. Page 22 has the budgeted expenses for the community center. And that also has a levy again of 0 for 2018. Again, we do fund the debt service of the community center 100% by the levy, but not the operations. We are working on some agreement, again, with Consolidated Communications as their agreement had expired in May. The reserve balance of this fund is 69% of the expenditures. Again, we have some things coming up in the near future here that are going to be changing. Is there going to be, what kind of agreement established with Consolidated Communications? Is there going to be a part of a levy that is going to be going away for the community center building? Portion of that, should it come into this fund or not? So those are some future discussions that we'll be having. One other area of interest is in our insurance fund. A few years back, we had decided to go to a higher deductible insurance plan of $50,000, and the savings that we acquired at that time were put aside into an insurance pool fund. And so in the incidence of when we hit those $50,000 deductibles, we are then able to use those funds and not having those, that $50,000 expenditure coming out of that utility or the general fund. And so there is about $216,000 of that funding available in that insurance pool by the end of this year. I also have some graphs that I can go through briefly. Again, these are some of the graphs that we've seen in the past. The chart here shows the breakdown from 2017 revenues. And so you can see on the bottom section in the gold color our change in our needs for local government aids as our main source in that 39% for the 2018 revenue. Property taxes and utility fund transfers are the next two sources of revenues that fund the general fund budget. Here is a recap of the revenues over a 5-year plan in different categories and how they have changed from year to year. And then we also have a chart for expenditures broke down into a service type, as I call them. Personnel, office expenses, professional services, repair and maintenance, capital, and transfers. As you can see, our transfers have changed. It is typically more down here, as in the past. Here we have some transfers that we have allocated to the Parkland Community Spirit Park build out. And so, again, we've talked about that in the past. There is still a looming deficit of that project. And so, again, at the time of discussions with the budget approval in December, there is also that option of covering those expenses with our one-time revenues that we received, as well as our other options we've talked. And my final chart is our expenditures showed by categories of the state. The state represents these categories in most of the reporting that they do. And so this is, again, the 5-year history of how we have compared to those category groups. On page 95 and 96, you have a resolution that indicates what the levy value will be and what the uses of that levy money will be. As well, in the last paragraph, it does discuss that you will have a final levy discussion at your December 11th meeting at 7 p.m. here in the governor's room. So if there's any other questions, I could answer for you.
Anyone? Questions or comments? Steve? Steve, you want to turn your microphone?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, Paula. If I can just get back to the narrative. A couple items I just want to ask. We have talked about the legacy money that we received from the state, the $200,000. And could you briefly describe when those dollars have to be encumbered?
Let me answer that one, since I'm in charge of the grant application portion of that. Those funds have to be expended by the end of June in 2019.
Okay. Another question I have. You mentioned that the fund balance in the fire fund capital for the truck purchase is $86,000. Over what period of time was that collected?
You know, the year rings 2013.
It's primarily from house calls or just fire calls or anything?
They're county calls or country calls, anything in our district, our fire contract district,
Okay.
and vehicles on the highway.
And one final point I want to ask. I know that you're pretty smart when it comes to numbers.
I throw a
But-
lot of them out, don't I?
I'm going to try this on you. I calculated out that 37% of the market value of property in St. Peter is exempt. So if we did not have that exempt property and we could levy 100% across all property, what do you think the tax rate would be for the typical $150,000 homeowner?
You know, you got a lot of value in a lot of those buildings.
Right?
I can't even fathom a guess here for you,
Okay,
but
all right.
it would be significant.
Okay, just curious, that's all. All right. I still say you're pretty smart, though.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
Jeff?
And I'm guessing our local government aid wouldn't be as high either.
Correct.
That's
We
also
don't know-
represented.
We don't know that, though.
Well, that's represented in the formula, the
Okay.
state buildings and non-tax exempt buildings.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about recently, and I've only been on the council for 5 years. This is my 5th budget I've been a part of here, but it seems like in the last 5 years we've reviewed the different licenses and permits, but I don't think we've actually made significant changes to those. Is that correct? Is my memory correct?
I think that's probably true. You've had some additions, but I wouldn't categorize any of the changes on a line-by-line basis for any specific fees as changing dramatically. What this budget includes, as Paula indicated, is a total of about $15,000 across all fees, if I remember that right. Help me out, Paula.
10. We indicated 10 just in the recreation department.
And there are a few other smallish ones, and from my perspective, from my chair, the council's position on fees has been that it's your goal to set the vast majority of them at a level at which their cost is to provide for the permit, the inspection, the processing, the submittal to the state of Minnesota, whatever it is. You do have some fees that you set that are more fees for service and not related to licensing or permits. So as an example, you do have a fee for use of a payloader with a person in it. And so you've modified those on occasion, but generally those are set higher than your cost because it has been the council's goal not to be in that involved in that business in the private sector. And so those are probably the two largest exceptions to how the fees are established. Typically review that in October or November and establish those fees for effective date of January 1 of the upcoming year.
So I know the city council in the past has had that perspective, but my thinking has changed a little bit in recent years. For instance, there aren't a lot of businesses that I can go into in St. Peter and notice the same price for an item or service as it was 5 years ago, primarily because of fuel costs, healthcare, and wages. We also have the same thing with our budget. Healthcare went up 15.2%. Fuel costs vary. Wages, 2 to 3% for union and non-union across the board. And so from my perspective, I feel that permits and licenses within the city of St. Peter also have at least a small amount of a fair share to play in that. I know the brunt of that is being passed on to the people who pay taxes in our community. But again, I can't go into a business and pay the same price with what I paid for in 2011 or 2012. That for that service are good. It just doesn't happen like that anymore because of significant changes. And I think that I'm looking at it from a different lens now. And I'm hoping to at least bring that to the next discussion we have, and hopefully we can make some changes to the fees. I mean, not enough to chase a business out of town by any means, but I really think that some of those fees in particular could go up to index against the period of time in which last they actually had a change, and see where we're at.
When you started this argument, Jeff, or whatever, this point, I thought you were going to go the other way. That because costs are going up for people to operate a business, that maybe we should cut our fees. But, so I guess what I'm getting at is there's two sides to it, so we
There are.
will have the discussion down the road when we come to the, go ahead.
Again, I mean, yeah, that's the same thing that happens at every state house across the country. There's two sides to every argument. However, I just feel like when I go into a store, those prices are changed, and I have to pay those prices as a consumer. And,
I see your point.
and so, and I know I have to pay it as a taxpayer. And I feel like they should also be reflected somewhat in the fees and the licensing.
Okay. Questions for Paula? Sue?
I want to talk about sidewalks. A year ago, the council was talking about budgets, and at that point, I think everybody was in general agreement that we needed to do more to increase the pace at which we're installing sidewalks around St. Peter. We have a plan, we have identified locations where those sidewalks need to go, and we've prioritized those. This past year, we made our first commitment to that. What we talked about a year ago was 3 years at $100,000. There are additional sources of funding for sidewalks out there, but as we saw today with construction costs as they are, that even with grant dollars available, we're not going to see all of those sidewalks get installed anytime in the near future. There's a lot of work to do to install sidewalks in the places that they're needed in this community. Last week, when we were discussing this at the workshop, I brought up that I wanted to see that money for sidewalks reinstated in this year's budget. We had a discussion. I thought that discussion ended with most everybody being in agreement that that's a good idea. Today, that's not in our budget again, and I want to know why.
As you know, again, you can do this in two different ways. I took the discussion last time as being in a budget discussion, which we will approve in December. So if it's a levy discussion, it is not, you're right, it's not in this levy. It can still be in your budget discussion and used in that one-time money as we talked about. So the $600,000 that we show in our general fund budget, there's a $600,000 increase in our reserves for the year. And so the plan can be in December to use those funding for that project.
I'd like to see more commitment than that.
That's what our discussion was, that when in November, not December, that we would decide what we're going to do with the $600,000. The sidewalk was the leading contender. There were a couple of others, but yeah, I'm in favor of taking a portion of that for the sidewalks also, and I think the majority of the council is. I believe that's the council's intention.
But I don't know if we need it here right now, and that's, but my understanding, Paul, was what you had stated, was that we were going to do this, when it came time to decide.
If I can, Mayor and members, on the bottom of page 16 and the top of page 17 within your packet, I hoped that I articulated staff's understanding of that discussion, which was when tax capacity numbers were available, you would have a discussion about two significant issues related to funding. The first was issuance of equipment certificate, whether to use cash instead of issuance of equipment certificate. And again, not in any prioritized order, but this is the order that you discussed them in. And the second bullet point there is reinsertion of $100,000 toward your sidewalk program. That's how I walked away from that discussion. If I'm in error, certainly it's at the pleasure of the council to make a modification. And if you want to increase the levy by $100,000 or $50,000 or $25,000 or whatever number you want to pick, certainly this is the opportunity for you to do that. And Paula has the ability to inject that number into a spreadsheet and tell you what the impact is on tax rate and other things.
Go ahead, Sue.
Then I guess I guess I thought there was more prioritization to how we were going to talk about that 600,000, or I guess I envisioned this as being earmarked as part of it, and I don't feel that it is. I feel like it's left open, but if you're telling me there's not an appropriate way to earmark that at this point, then we'll let it go.
No, I think the council has the opportunity to earmark dollars in whatever way, shape, or form that you wanted. Again, from a staff perspective, my understanding of the discussion was that you wanted to have that specific discussion at the time the tax capacity numbers were available. I think it's also true to remember that you now project a reserve number that's in excess of your policy. And at some point during your discussion, you talked about using resources that would reduce that number more into the middle range of that 35 to 50%. My recollection is the number that was discussed and was put up on the board was something like 46.7 or 46.3%. And so certainly if the council wants to vote, I would expect that, and I would think the process would be, is that if you want to earmark resources, set aside some reserve dollars for that. That's certainly an amendment that you can make. I'd prefer that you don't do it as an amendment, but you do it as a separate action and allow the levy action to stand its own, since there are protocols that we like to observe when sending this data to the county as they press the rate against properties within St. Peter.
I understand all of that. That's fine. Then I guess we'll wait.
Anyone else?
I guess my point is, though, is that if there's a want to take action, certainly my recommendation to you would be to act on the resolution that's in your packet. And if there's a resolution that comes from the floor that says we want to set aside X amount of dollars from the $601,000 odd dollars anticipated reserve, you can pass a resolution that says that and directs it towards some use, whether it's sidewalks or equipment certificate or whatever it might be.
No need.
Any other questions? Paula, you had mentioned, and Jeff brought it up again, the 15.2%, and maybe you said it for the health insurance increase. What does that come out to dollar-wise?
$140,000
$140,000.
for the general fund.
Yeah, and we're short 200 and some thousand. I mean, when you did the first numbers, 210,000, whatever it was.
The increase in our general fund
Right.
expenditures, correct.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, just want people to know that. And the other thing I wanted to point out was, and maybe this, I don't think will help Susie, but it might, key word to me tonight is preliminary. Because then we can, make changes as we want later.
This is just setting your maximum
Right.
on your property tax levy
Right.
for revenues for the general
Right.
fund budget.
Right. Anyone else, questions or comments? If not, the resolution adopting the preliminary 2017 tax levy collectible in 2018 appears on pages 95 and 96. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Curran.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Schwann.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Resolution passes. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the city code modification for the keeping of honeybees. And Todd?
Mayor, remember, yeah, if I can
Okay.
start out, there's information included in your packet on page 97 with the draft modification to your ordinance following on page 99 and thereafter. Let me just hit on a couple of points. This is a code modification. So essentially what it does is changes the definition within your code, thereby allowing honeybees to be kept in town. It puts bees on the exempt list, which is indicated on page 99 within your packet. There are some rules that go along with this, following the same pattern that you used for urban chickens. And so just to hit a couple of those, it's a 2-hive maximum, must be 25 feet from neighboring residential structures. There's a flyway barrier. As you may recall, the original draft that you saw included 2 types of barrier. The council recommendation was to change that so there was only 1 type of barrier, which would be 6 feet tall and 10 feet wide if that hive is within 25 feet of a property line. An addition that was made by the council to the original draft was to include a readily available source of water. And then also to provide notice to property owners within 100 feet. The ordinance that you see within your packet is drafted in a way that would require the applicant to provide that communication. I don't want to speak exactly to the rationale of that, although one or two items that were brought up as a part of your discussion is that the applicant probably knows more about beekeeping than I do, and so as questions come up with their neighbors, they're probably in a better position to provide for an answer for that. But that would be something that you would require as a part of your permitting process. There are 7 ways that a permit can be revoked, and of course, the ordinance allows for an inspection really at any time by the city. One other item that I'd like to point out that probably needs some additional discussion on the part of the council tonight is that as the ordinance here is drafted tonight, this would not be applicable until April of next year. Part of that relates to the time of year that we're in, and frankly allows me, although I don't need that much time, a little bit of time to develop the process for permitting, what the form looks like, all of that kind of stuff that's necessary. Let me mention one other one that I think is also important that is similar to many ordinances that I've seen in other communities. It also requires that some type of beekeeping course be taken by the applicant. It doesn't go into a lot more detail than that, so it could be some course offered by a honeybee association, or as we discussed, there are courses that are offered through the University of Minnesota and extension programs, as well as others. I have not done an extensive level of research related to what is the best course and how many credits should it be and what's the best value and how does that all work out. The discussion at your workshop, at least from my perspective, tended to be geared towards we want somebody to know something about honeybees, but we don't want to get into that much oversight as to dictating what the course should or should not be. And so let's make sure that somebody has some knowledge before they get into this. There are certainly other provisions that are included in here, but at least from my perspective, those are the changes that you recommended at the time of draft, and probably the most, at least from my view, the most significant issues that are included in the ordinance. Again, the ordinance is in your packet, starting on page 99 and ending on page 102.
Okay, any questions right now before we bring up some of the citizens that wanted to speak? If not, if you want to come up one at a time, or if you're just speaking in a group, that would be fine too. However you guys want to do it. The 3 of you that raised your hand, yeah, come on up. And if you can, you're not new to this routine, right? If you can give us your name and your home address, please, and we'll try to keep it within 5 minutes, and we may have some questions for you. Thank you.
Sure. I'm Emily Blueflat. My address is 317 Grace Street. And my husband, Nathan Koster, could not be with us tonight. He's on a work trip in Iowa. He regrets that he couldn't join me tonight. But first of all, we are just so thankful that you have taken the time to look at this and seriously consider this ordinance and dealing with this request. You know, it was not our original intent to, be involved in such an endeavor. But since our first meeting when we brought this up, we have had so many people come up to us and ask, how is this bee thing going? Or thank you guys, we really support you. A number of those people are here tonight, some various people, and just kind of a last minute, I asked them all today if they'd be willing to come this evening for the vote. And so thank you all for your support. And neighbors too, we've had a number of neighbors come over and say, hey, it's really great what you're doing. And a lot of well-wishers. I've had some phone calls and emails and things too. So, we had no idea or expectation that this would be such a big story, but it's been really fun. Nathan wanted me to bring up a couple of things. He wanted to say that he does have some concerns with the proposed language in the ordinance, such as, the freedom to exchange or trade bees, and he had specifics about that that he knows more about because of his experience with beekeeping, such as queens, and sometimes a queen fails and you can get a queen from another beekeeper if you have one, if there are enough keepers in the same area, and little things like that he had questions about. And then, Todd, you pointed out some of the, or you clarified some of our question about the required class, that you're still looking at a number of options.
Let me provide additional clarification.
Sure.
As this is drafted, it is certainly not my intent as the primary drafter of this to do additional research on the types of classes. You have a permit application and you show up with a certificate that says, I've taken a honeybee course, whether it's from the University of Minnesota or if it's from Todd's Beekeeping School Extraordinaire.
Sure.
Any of those would be equally acceptable as a part of the process.
Good, that clarifies a lot of his concern there, thank you. But he generally, we really appreciate the expediency of this proposal, and we think this is very agreeable, and hopes that, moving forward, if there are any little changes that there would be opportunity for little tweaks and changes as we move into this. And anyway, I guess, we both hope that whatever is decided tonight, is based on, solid information. I hope all of you have been able to look into a little bit more about bees. I know you had your workshop, and I hope that your fears, if you've had any fears or concerns, that those have been put at ease. We hear, there are phrases all the time, that bees, it's a threat to the public or a menace to society, but that kind of language just isn't true about honeybees. They're very docile, they're very, focused on their one job, getting honey, and that's all or getting the pollen to make the honey, and that's all they really want to do. And they're, they've been in the yard since April, and I haven't even had one come near me, really. I have never been stung by anything. So they're leaving me alone. They're leaving us alone. Our neighbors aren't complaining to our awareness. So do you have any questions for me?
Questions? Susan?
I have maybe a question for Jim. I think maybe the part you were referencing was section 8232. It says, except as otherwise provided in this code, it is unlawful for a person to keep or harbor or allow the breeding of animals for the purpose of operating a business to sell, trade, slaughter. And so that's the part where you were questioning the ability to trade an extra queen or something like that for establishment somewhere.
Sure.
Would that, Jim, would that sort of one-off sort of thing be prohibited by this? I view this, that would be outside of the scope of a business.
So here you're talking about operating a business. I don't see that this is, I picture only 2 hives to be more of a hobby
Right.
than a business. I don't see that you're going to create enough honey in 2 hives to be able to sell it,
No.
like at a farmer's market or anything. I would think that you would need more than 2 hives to
Yeah.
be able to create that. So
And
I think the operating a business would modify that concern because you're
Sure.
not operating a business.
Okay.
So
yeah. And
even in a hypothetical, I don't know how the beekeeping world works. If you had an extra queen and you were to sell it to somebody for $20 or something, I don't know what bees are worth. I don't think even that would justify as a business, right?
Right, because it's operating a business.
Okay.
It's not, it's more,
Sure.
I picture this as being more of a hobby.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah,
really
so-
what we see it. I know my husband wants to eventually brew mead, and and we won't even get any honey this year because they need it to the first year a hive is established. They need that time to build all the comb before they can start producing honey, and so they're going to need all of that honey this winter if they want a chance of surviving. So, yeah, we're not in this for money. We really want to benefit the community and our garden and be good stewards. So,
Anyone else? Questions? Emily, I have one. You aren't going to get any this year, but how often do you harvest? Or
I don't know the answer. My husband would know that better. I think that you would, my guess is once a year in the fall
Right.
is likely for harvest time. He pulled one frame last week, and we're not going to take anything out of it at this point, but it was full of capped honey, and it looked, and it's really heavy. But yeah, they're working hard, but yeah, we're,
Okay,
I would say once a year.
thank you.
Yeah. What do you think? Oh, the ordinance. Oh, there was another question. I forgot.
That's it. If
Sorry.
you come up with it later,
Yeah,
just
that's fine.
send it up with the next
Sure,
person or the
sure.
person after. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Laura Lindell. I live at 742 Sioux Lane on the north side. I've been a homeowner in St. Peter for 10 years now. I just want to speak to some very general principles. I feel like you guys are already a little bit beyond that and you're talking specifics, but I just really want to urge you to think about general principles and the fact that this is a great thing to do. So I am speaking in support of the change to city code. And I have 3 points that I'd like to make. My first one is I think that I know that bees really strengthen our ecosystem, and bee pollination is extremely important for gardens and crops, and bees are a link in many food chains. So they help us to be a resilient community, and they even, small numbers of honeybees can help us to cope with unexpected disruptions to our climate, our economy, our food systems, whatever those might be in the future. My second point is beekeeping is obviously a very specialized task. It takes a lot of care and skill. I think that we could even say that it's an art, and I think that it's very cool if we can have people continue to maintain the knowledge of how to do that, and perhaps to intrigue young people and bring them into it as well, so that we keep that knowledge going in our community. And then my third point is I think that having the ability to do beekeeping in our community helps to root and anchor homeowners in our community. I think that all of us understand very well that there's a balance between individual freedom and communal well-being. There may be some concerns about bees as a dangerous proposition, but I would argue that no, they are very helpful to our community, and in a situation like this, providing that individual freedom to somebody like Nathan Koster is not negatively impacting our communal well-being at all. And I think that we want to encourage people to do things like this, and that will help to anchor them into our community and to feel like they belong here and they have roots here. So yes, once again, I just want to say that I very much support this, and I appreciate the council considering this, and hope that you will pass the modification to our city code. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jim, or James Donchi. I also live at 742 Sioux Lane, so one address is piling it on here. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. And that's a pun intended. A few years ago, I was meditating on things I'd like to do in St. Peter, things that, if time permits, which may not in the short term. Two things came up in my mind, things that have enriched my life in the past. Chickens and bees. So you're 1 for 2 and right on the verge of going 2 for 2. Thank you. But this is I want to simultaneously address the why would we want this and why it's not a bad thing. You heard my wife's name, Lindell. That if you dig around in the Swedish heritage of that name, one possible meaning for that name is dweller by the linden tree. And we have a large linden tree in our backyard. And a few years back, I went outside and there was this incredible roar. When it blooms, it is full of honeybees on some years, which tells you about the concern about hives. We can already, without hives in the city, attract plenty of honeybees. So I don't think we're changing that dynamic in any way by adding some backyard hives. And the other side of that is some years recently, there have been almost no honeybees, which points to a concern we have nationwide about the loss of honeybee colonies. And one of the ways that we can sort of bolster that population is by more people keeping bees. So thank you for your interest in this, and I too support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Did council have any questions or comments? John?
I do. I have a question on the top of page 101, number 5. It says the hives must include a flyway barrier, height of minimum 6 feet, 10 feet tall, on any side of permitted properties within 25 feet of the property line. I have no idea what that means, the way it's worded. I think it's talking about something about the hive being within 25 feet of the property line, but it doesn't say that. My understanding of the flyway barrier is that it's between the entrance and the property line, so that the bee leaving the hive tends to elevate and be higher than on someone's head when they leave the property. So I don't know why it doesn't say that the hives must include a flyway barrier 10 feet high, 6 feet wide, facing the entrance of the hive. Isn't that what we are wanting to make happen?
I assume if you said it, John, that's what you would like to see happen, and so you can certainly modify
I would
the
like to
ordinance.
see this happen, but I'd like to see 5 other people.
So, as I'm reading this, item 3 in that same section dictates that the hives are a minimum of 25 feet away from neighboring residential structures.
Yes, 7 feet from the property line.
7 feet from the property line, 25 feet from a structure.
So this would say the hives must include a flyway barrier, such as a fence, dense vegetarian or combination materials at a height of a minimum of 6 feet and 10 feet wide, facing the entrance of the hive.
Yeah. That distance is already covered in those other 2 items above.
What distance? I didn't say anything about a distance.
The
I just
current
said-
number 5 has a distance included, the 25 feet.
I just took that out.
I'm indicating that the reason to take it out is because that same information, it's rendered redundant by the other information in 3 and 4. I'm supporting what you're saying. I'm giving reason for what you're saying.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
We can certainly make that change.
All right.
In number 6, the applicant must demonstrate receipt and maintain a certificate of completion of a honeybee keeping course. All we want to know is that they've demonstrated that they've taken a course. I don't care if it's a receipt, or if they can answer questions about it, or they talk about the online course they took, or whatever it is. I don't know that an online course will have a certificate of completion.
I don't know for sure either, John, and this is a big assumption, but my assumption is if there is a course that's completed, there will be some documentation that indicates that the course has been taken and completed. A
So-
transcript, a certificate that gets printed out as a PDF file, a little pocket card so you can show your friends, or I don't know, but there would likely be some documentation for some type of course.
So it's, instead of and, maybe, are we doing ors instead?
Or
Does
just-
that make sense?
Pardon. If we said must demonstrate documentation of completion of a honeybee keeping course?
There you go.
If I can, since we're wordsmithing, you might want to say the applicant must provide documentation that they've completed a course.
That's even better.
Thank you. That's
And
easier.
Number 8, my very last one, says the applicant must provide proof that a notice has been sent to the property owners within 100 feet. Does that mean, what, certified mail? How do you provide proof? Why don't we just say the applicant must provide notice to the neighbors within 100 feet?
You certainly may.
Isn't that what we want done? We don't want them going...
Is it something that you want to check on at your workshop? You wanted to make sure that applicants did it. That's kind of a messy one. Do they go knock on the door? I mean, I think we could accept a letter or an affidavit or a certified letter. It doesn't specify, so it leaves it very wide open, but if you'd like to specify more directly, we certainly can. It was the goal to have applicants communicate with neighbors within 100 feet.
Yep, but
And so you'd
provide,
want to make sure that they did that.
but provide proof is a certified letter. I don't know how else you provide proof that you notified them.
It doesn't specifically say, John, so you could change that or list that out tonight if you would like.
I don't think we need to make any changes. I think that the proof can simply be them signing a piece of paper that says, I did this. I contacted these people, and they signed a piece of paper, and that's the proof. We're trusting them. They're signing their name to it.
Okay, so they must certify that they have provided notice to the neighbors.
Well,
Sure.
if you're certifying with your signature.
Yeah.
That's what, yeah. And I would think you would put in the neighbors instead of the neighbors, make sure that they list out the addresses. Yeah. We don't care about names, we care about addresses, I would think.
We're not trying to put hurdles in the way of people doing this.
Frankly, that's why I didn't specify what the method of notice was.
Okay. Jerry?
Before you leave that one, if I may.
Sorry.
So what's the wishes of the council? So instead of saying provide proof, must certify that a notice stating these had been kept. Is that what I understood? I want to make sure that I have this
Wouldn't that
documented
take an
appropriately.
amendment? Wouldn't somebody have to call an amendment?
It hasn't been motioned yet.
Hasn't been moved yet.
We can move it as modified,
Okay.
if you're comfortable with that modification.
So number 8 would say that, would say applicant must certify that a notice stating bees are being kept on the subject property has been delivered to property owners within 100 feet of the beekeeping property.
No.
Works.
Sure.
Okay.
Jerry?
I am opposed to bees in town. I was opposed to chickens in town. 50 years ago, when I moved into St. Peter, I thought, you know, compared to other rural communities in the state, St. Peter was a little more cosmopolitan. They had a liberal arts school here, they had a hospital here, a good school system. And at that time, I determined I was going to move to St. Peter. If I'd have wanted to live like Ma and Pa Kettle, I'd have moved to the Ozarks in Arkansas. If you know, this is what hobby farms are for. If you want to have animals, and other than a dog or a cat or maybe a parakeet, you know, you live in the country, which is right. Next, we're going to be looking at, because goat's milk is good for kids, we'll be talking about having goats in town. And then, you know, I don't know what comes after goats, maybe sheep, but that's, to me, that is supposed to be outside of town. My wife's cousin in Crawford County, Missouri, has 10 beehives on her property. She lives in a rural area. And just on Facebook, she wrote on Saturday that she'd been out in her yard and was stung in on her lips 6 times on Saturday. So I know only 3% of people are allergic to bee stings. Some of them can get stung time and time again, it doesn't bother them. But that 3%, that can be deadly. And I'm not so concerned about the adults because they can carry their pens with them. But I'm concerned about children. And if you can live with losing the life of a child because of an anaphylactic shock, I guess that's your concern. But I am totally against it.
Okay. Anyone else? Jeff?
So I look at this in a different way. I come from a different perspective as co-owner of a native pollinator type of a business where we grow plants and native plant landscaping, and then also as a amateur conservation minded person. I come up with this a different perspective that maybe will be talked about tonight, so bear with me here. So the honeybee, first of all, was introduced in the 17th century from Europe. It's not a native of this country. But to be fair, honeybees aren't villains. In fact, honeybees are critical to agricultural crops across the world, in particular here in America. They can be attributed to $15 billion with a B in crop production each year. So that's not insurmountable. That's huge. Native bees, along with other native pollinators, however, can also do some of that same pollination. But ecologically, they are the keystone species that pollinate or are the lunch for most of the native terrestrial species in the world. According to the National Wildlife Association, there are 4,000 species of native pollinators north of Mexico. So since the early Cretaceous period, native plants and pollinators have been coexisting in a symbiotic relationship that has been essential for biodiversity in our world that we live in. Native pollinators are often specialized to a certain species of plant as a result of many centuries of evolution, if not millennia. Honeybees, however, aren't picky and will go after whatever is available. Further, approximately 15 to 20,000 species of flowering plant in the United States are more efficiently pollinated by a behavior known as buzz pollination, which is something that many native bee species can do quite well, but honeybees are incapable of doing at all. Did you know that a single honeybee colony requires 45 to 330 pounds of pollen each year? Before we allow anyone in our community to have bees, what is the inventory of available food for them already in existence in St. Peter? Let's use the same conservative estimate as we did with chickens. Having six people having 2 hives spread throughout our town would require 540 to 3,960 pounds of pollen each year just for their survival. Recent evidence has also emerged demonstrating that honeybees can transmit diseases to many different species of native bees, including bumblebees, where their interaction at shared flowers. Bumblebees placed close to honeybee hives are found to have 18% higher prevalence of RNA virus called Critidia bombi that bumblebees placed away from honeybees. That was in a research study, peer-reviewed, scholarly written article about a number of RNA viruses that were formerly thought to be specific to honeybees have now been reported in infected bumblebees. The rust-patched bumblebee is the first of its kind in the United States to be put on the endangered species list and lives here in Minnesota. This is a species that 20 years ago had 90% more population and was visible in 28 states. A recent reviewed paper looked at disease transmission between managed and wild bees and concluded that the commercial use of pollinators is a key driver of emerging disease in wild pollinators, and that avoiding anthropogenic-induced pathogen spillover is crucial to preventing disease emergence in native pollinators. Again, another journal article, scholarly reviewed article. Because of the potential threats to our native pollinators, now this is from a society called the Xerces Society, whose mission is to support, to advocate for policy in favor of native pollinators across the country. Because of the potential threats to our native pollinators, until additional evidence exists documented that honeybees have a net neutral effect in our native biota, we urge policymakers and land managers to consider these potential impacts and their relevance when making a decision about the placement of apiaries on public lands. This weekend, I spent about a half hour in my backyard looking specifically for pollinators, and here's what I found. 2 species of sweat bees. Well, I couldn't count, and I'm not that great at counting what types of bumblebee there were, but there were a lot of bumblebees out there collecting for the end of the year. There was a species called the green halictid bee, 2 species of ground nesting wasp, which I could live without, but they're there, and many butterflies, admiral, painted lady, black swallowtail, monarch, cabbage white, yellow sulfur, the milkweed beetle, and the hummingbird moth, which looks like a hummingbird, but it's actually a moth. So, to conclude, native pollinators are already endangered and at risk due to loss of critical habitat. That's the major role of that. in recognition of the potential impacts of the native pollinators that already reside in our community, it is in our best interest as a city council to choose not to do this tonight. That's all I had.
Anyone else?
I have some follow-up comments.
Yep, go ahead.
I don't disagree with most of the facts that you stated, Jeff. That said, I disagree with some of the conclusions you came to. It is certainly true that introduced honeybees have introduced diseases into wild populations of native pollinators in North America. I think it would be infinitesimally unlikely that the introduction of 1 or 2 additional hives in the city limits would cause any substantial impact to the native pollinators who are already here. Native pollinators have lots of challenges. European honeybees also have lots of challenges. While it's good to recognize and support the needs of those native pollinators, I think it's also worthwhile to recognize the role of honeybees in modern society in North America. They're an introduced species, there's no doubt about that. So are apple trees. So are most of the fruits and vegetables that we're consuming out of our gardens here in town. And if you want to get rid of honeybees, then you're going to be getting rid of pretty much the majority of the fruits and vegetables that you choose to eat here in town. We already have honeybees that are pollinating those. The introduction of these 2 hives is a drop in the bucket of how many honeybees already are naturally existing in this area. These 2 hives are not going to have any impact on the amount of food available. It's not going to have, what I mean by that is 2 more hives of honeybees are not going to create a level of competition amongst the existing bees that would be measurable in any way whatsoever. We have enormous capacity to support a lot more pollinators of all sorts. These bees are not going to impact that whatsoever. To follow up with some of the comments that Jerry made, you're right that hobby farms are a great place to raise bees or chickens. I haven't done any pricing recently, but I would guess that the average hobby farm in this area goes for at least $500,000. There are a lot of people.
Look in the paper. They have been some very
Okay, let
reasonable.
Susie finish.
There are a lot of expenses that go along with something like that. There are a lot of folks who are interested in potentially keeping bees or keeping chickens who can't afford that kind of commitment, and frankly, shouldn't take on a commitment of that kind of acreage if they don't have the skills to handle all those other components. It's quite possible to keep chickens or bees in your backyard without causing any harm, and you don't need 20 acres to do it. It's perfectly possible to happen here in town. I think I had another comment, but I'm not sure what that one was now, so I'll pass the mic along.
Anyone else?
Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, this has been a real, it seems like any time we have one of these issues, whether it be chickens, goats, mules, or camels, it's pretty subjective conversation, emotional. So I thought, okay, who could I talk to about this? Because all I know is what I read the paper, and I've heard about the honeybees, they're important. So I called an entomologist. And I thought, no, who would know more than anybody else? An entomologist. So I called one, and I said, okay, I'm on the city council, I'm Steve Grams, I'm just curious, tell me what you know about the European honeybee. So we had a conversation, and he was very objective, and he said the European honeybee decimates the native populators in our country, the North American continent. He said they're not native to this North American continent. They decimate the food source for the native pollinators. And this person has got no interest in it either way. He's an expert, PhD, He said they are voracious pollinators. They consume the food chain for the native pollinators in our country, in the North American continent. He said they've done more to destroy the native pollinator population than any other insect that's been injected into the North American continent. So then I started thinking about I started thinking of all these other invasive species that we have. You know, we've got the Asian carp right now that's coming up the rivers, you know, and that was accidentally introduced into the ecosystem. And we've got the milfoil, and we've got all these mussels and all these other native things that are invasive species for environment. And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe the European honeybee isn't the greatest thing that we think it is. So up to this point, I haven't decided, but talking to an entomologist, that really was an eye-opener for me. So that's all I have to say, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else?
I have some
Susan?
follow-up comments to that as well. Again, I don't disagree with you that European honeybees have caused a lot of damage to the native bee populations. That is absolutely true. Having said that, our entire food supply in North America hinges upon the existence of those honeybees. Native pollinators do not pollinate any of the food crops that were brought overseas. So if it's not a fruit or vegetable that naturally occurred in North America, it is not going to be pollinated by anything except honeybees. So if we like all those fruits and vegetables, we rely upon European honeybees to provide them. Having said that, if we decide that we don't like honeybees and we can live without ever eating an apple again in our lives, that's fine. The existence of 2 hives or 8 hives in the city of St. Peter will have zero impact on that larger ecosystem. We're not talking about whether or not honeybees should exist in North America. The cat's out of the bag. They're going to be here till after we're gone. The question is, can somebody in town keep honeybees for the purpose of pollinating local fruits and vegetables and harvesting honey for personal consumption? And that's kind of different from that issue of the national ecological system.
Jeff?
A comment I'd like to make. You listen to an entomologist, a professional in this field.
Yep.
I'm listing several peer-reviewed, scientific reviewed papers in scientific journals. Or I could listen to what you think might or might not happen in St. Peter. And so from my perspective, I'm going to listen to the professionals in this, and that's why I'm going to vote no on this tonight. Everybody can choose to vote however they want, but that's where I'm going to stand.
If I may?
Yep.
The article you quoted, Jeff, said that they don't encourage the existence of European honeybee hives on public lands, meaning in conservation areas. That is not what this is at all.
Jeff?
The city is public lands also, because we're not talking about a national park. We're not talking about anything else. We're not talking about agricultural land either. We don't have a lot of crops in our community that require honeybees. If the only reason we're having honeybees is for hobbyists in our town, and it doesn't have anything to do with food production in our community, because 10 years ago when I moved to this town, I somehow grew fruits and vegetables without the aid of the honeybee hives that we have in this community as of April 2017. I think that St. Peter, a city entity, is a public entity, and we're public land managers in a way by discussing what to do within city limits. And we're also policymakers, which is what they were talking to as well.
Couple
Susan?
comments. First of all, that's not what they meant. They didn't mean Minnesota Square Park. Those articles were written in reference to managing public lands for conservation. I'm quite sure of that. Secondly, the fruits and vegetables that you were growing, many of them probably were being pollinated by honeybees. Whether there were hives present or not, they were being pollinated by honeybees. And third, I'd ask a question. Do you actually advocate for the removal of honeybees completely out of North America? Is that what you think this would be a step towards?
Do you want to respond?
Well,
Otherwise I'll
obviously,
move
no,
on.
I like to eat food, and so honeybees are essential to that. What I'm advocating is that we keep them in agricultural areas where they can be most productive, and
That's-
keep the native
yeah, sorry.
pollinators having some habitat where they can call their own. And if that's within the city limits, or in a national park, or wherever left, somebody hasn't decided to plow up food for agricultural production, I'm all for supporting the native pollinators within our state and our country.
Well, that's the point I guess I wanted to make was it isn't that Mr. Coster and Emily don't have somewhere else to go with this. And they don't go in their backyard every day and collect honey. You know, it's not like a chicken where you can gather them up. The biggest concern I have is I think they would do a marvelous job, and they have probably done a marvelous job with taking care of it. My concerns are people that may get this and you buy a property here anywhere, and you get a title to it, and you have the use for the quiet enjoyment of your property. And someone next door may have a beehive that they are not taking care of. Though, that's my concern with this. And I don't care what we fine them, what we cite them for, it may be too late. If you have an inquisitive kid that has not been told that the danger, potential danger of messing with this, it could be, as Jerry said, depending on, it could be a fatal situation. It's not like chickens. Your chickens get out, they aren't gonna do much damage. And that's my concern with having them in a small lot in a city like this. That's all I want to say. John?
And yet the city of Minneapolis has no problem with this.
I
The
don't-
city of St. Paul has no problem with this, where they have 500,000 people, 750,000
Yeah.
people. And it's a lot smaller than ours.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to create any issues.
Anyone else?
We have a clear policy for how to deal with a case of somebody not maintaining the hive appropriately. There is not an epidemic in this country of people being stung by backyard honeybee hives, and I don't think that that's going to be very likely. We've crafted these rules to keep everybody safe. And again, there are already far, far, far more honeybees in this community than what these two hives would introduce. This is a fraction of a percent of the overall population of stinging insects in the city of St. Peter. This is not even a drop in the bucket, and so this does not raise the risk in any measurable way.
But it could. Anyone else? Comments? If not, the ordinance amending the St. Peter City Code, Chapter 8, Animal, Article 4, Farm, Wild, and Exotic Animals, and adopting by reference, which among other things, with penalties, appears on pages 99, 100, and 102. 101 and 102. We had some amendments, so is there a motion for approval?
I'll move the modified ordinance.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Brand,
I think of myself as a progressive. At least some other people in the world have accused me of that in the past. However, tonight I have to say nay to this measure.
Councilmember Garland,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Nay.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer,
Nay.
Councilmember Graham.
After speaking to a professional that's much more educated than anybody that I'm aware of this council, I would have to vote nay.
Ordinance does not pass by a vote of 4 to 2. Therefore, we can skip over page 103, the resolution for fees. And next, we will go to city assistance for the homecoming parade.
Mayor, members, included in your packet on page 104 is a request from the St. Peter School District and through the Student Council for a parade on Friday, September 22nd at 4:30. I'll show a little map of the location that they're looking to have the parade. And so the staging area would be north of Broadway Avenue on 3rd Street for a block or two, and then the parade would move south on 3rd Street to Gray Street, at which point it would move west and end at Lincoln Drive. Now, I understand this is kind of the wrong way on Lincoln Drive, but the school could certainly control that for that event, and it's their goal to have then the floats and other things that are in the parade be able to be viewed potentially along Lincoln Drive. We haven't had recent action, and by recent action I mean certainly over the last 20-plus years related to approving a parade of this type. In the past, it's been very kind of ad hoc put together, but it was stated to me by the advisor and by the student council president that it's their goal to make this a larger event with classes having floats and those type of things. So what a laudable goal to try and make this be a little bit more of a community event rather than, frankly, just classes riding in the back of pickup trucks. And so this is their request. We would provide assistance in a couple of different ways. First of all, help with controlling traffic during that timeline. And then provide the opportunity for the parade to go as indicated. Some barricades it's necessary to provide for safety in that area. And again, the goal would be to start staging at 3:30 with the parade at 4 o'clock on September 22nd. The information is in your packet and the resolution is on page 107.
Questions, comments? Jeff?
My question, I guess, my initial thought was I thought, before reading too much into this, that they would be asking to do something more in our park, Community Spirit Park. I would have thought that this would have been a better location for it because it was within the school boundary, in particular 100%, instead of having it in a community. I mean, we're talking about a lot of students that have to leave their property and migrate at some point, bus, walk, drive, causing some conflict with traffic flow and things like that. I would have thought that maybe this is something that they could think about in the future, putting it in the Community Spirit Park.
Susie?
I think we just heard that they'd like to make it more of a community event, not less of a community event. By holding it through more of the community, they'll attract more participation. If they hold it at Community Spirit Park, it's going to be fairly isolated from the business and residential portion of town, and so there are probably going to be fewer members of the community present if it's held in the park. With the current location, and I'm fine with the route that they've selected, but I've wondered this before about a few of the parades that we have that run down 3rd Street. It doesn't seem like it would be that much further. I've wondered before if it would make more sense to hold some of, or to have the staging for some of these events there in the parking lots around Veterans Park. So that parking lot outside of the swim season is always pretty much empty, the one there along 4th Street. And the two dead-end roads, Chatham and Madison, have virtually no traffic. Would it be, and not even for this year, for this parade, but in general, when we're talking about all these parades that run down 3rd Street, would it maybe be a little bit safer to ask folks to go that extra block of distance and do more of the staging there? The parking would be off-site, or off-street, and there'd be more room for pedestrians to mingle around as they get ready for the parade to start. Just a consideration for the future for, you know, some of these other smaller parades that happen. So the
St.
St. Patrick's
is in this
Day,
location.
the Fish House Parade, if that's still an ongoing event, I'm not sure. Sometimes we've had something around Oktoberfest. Just something to consider. It means people have to walk a little bit further, and there are a few more homes that are maybe inconvenienced, I guess, but it seems like a safer place for staging. Just a thought.
Any other questions or comments? If not, the resolution authorizing city assistance for a high school homecoming parade appears on page 107. Is there a motion for approval?
Move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments?
If I can comment, I could certainly bring that back to the student council and talk to them about it in the future. I don't want to speak for them exactly, but the communication that I've had with them is that they're trying to do something a little bit different, and so this maybe falls in the line of an experiment this year, and they'll see how it goes, and leadership changes within the student council every year, and I'll be happy to bring that information back to them.
And that's more of a general comment for all of those parades too, so.
But then, where did they have the parade? They used to do it down here, did they not?
Broadway.
Yeah, so it changed.
They came across years, it was years and years ago, they used to run here and up Gray Street, I think, is where they used to. So, anyway.
For my part, I can say the last several years, they've run right by my house on
Oh,
Broadway, so
Okay.
where they go before and after, I'm not sure, but at least in the third, fourth, fifth
I'm
blocks.
talking when our kids were in high school. So
Oh, sorry. We'll have to skip ahead to about 2030 before I have that input, so.
All right. Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Garland.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Brennan.
Aye.
Resolution passes. Next up, we have a Wells Fargo and Company divestment policy.
Mayor members, this is an item that you've talked about on a number of occasions. The information is included in your packet on page 108 with the resolution on 110. I was very careful, I hope, to draft this in a way, and so let me go to the resolution on page 110, and then as you all want to comment or make modifications, you certainly can. The resolution here is specifically directing staff to allow existing investments with Wells Fargo and some of its company subsidiaries that are investment companies to expire. So this is not directing action on the part of the staff to terminate CDs that you might have or investments that you have currently. They would expire when the current agreement expires, and that we would make no further investments with Wells Fargo without discussion and future consideration by the City Council. Again, you've talked about this in a number of different occasions, and this is my best interpretation to find a place where you can either determine whether to take action or not take action. And certainly I'd be open to amendment, but that's what I've tried to put together for you.
Okay. Comments? Questions?
I-
Jerry?
This is something that I feel that has little effect on us. If we took every penny we had in various accounts and put it all into Wells Fargo, and then went over to Wells Fargo and said, we're taking our money back because we don't like the way you do business, that would have about the same effect on Wells Fargo as you would have on Lake Emily if you spit in it. And it makes absolutely no sense. If you're going to go on a crusade for something, go on a crusade for something that's going to enhance the lives of your constituents here in town. Not something for your self-gratification, but just do not limit the ability to on decisions that you can make in the future. There should be two things you can think about. One is where you're putting your money, is it secure? And the second one should be what's the dividend that it pays? And we do that on a competitive basis with them. They bid on it or they give quotes on it. And to me, that's as far as it should go.
Okay. Steve?
Out of respect for Mr. Pfeiffer, I do respect Mr. Pfeiffer a great deal. I'm sitting in his spot that he occupied for many, many years. Jerry was also my tutor in running for this spot. But I have to respectfully disagree with you, Mr. Pfeiffer. As much as I respect where you're at, I think as a group, we have to make a stand on certain issues every now and then. And my own investing, I try to be socially conscious of where I put my money. And I think as a city, we should be doing the same thing. Now, Wells Fargo has been identified as doing some things that are not appropriate to their employees or to the greater good of society. Then I think as a council, we need to make some kind of a position statement, and this is that position statement.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. Jerry, when this first came up, I think Jeff brought it up at one of our workshops, or maybe it was a workshop. I agreed with you, but boy, this Wells Fargo, the more I looked into it, and again last week, they just keep on giving and giving and giving, and there's just no reason for us with other people out there to keep doing business with them. Whether it has an effect or not, I don't care at this point. It just isn't right. Jeff?
So let me bring up a couple things. I brought this up when we were talking about our investment policy a while back. Wells Fargo is not exactly a good player. A few weeks ago, I really had some mixed feelings about supporting the Ameresco piece for modifying our, that sort of thing, because Bank of America is right up there with them, frankly. I mean, some of the things they did with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and that really made a big impact about how people lost a lot of money in the stock market when it crashed in 2008. We had the Great Recession. But to remind the folks why I think this is a very important thing to support, I've got a list of things just in the last 4 years that they've been accused of and were found guilty of. Wells Fargo discriminated against more than 500 African American brokers, people who work in Wells Fargo, by not giving them the same opportunities of advancement as white colleagues. They settled a $35.5 million case after it was found that these individuals were being targeted in an ongoing national pattern and practice of racial discrimination. That was according to Bloomberg. Wells Fargo repossessed 413 automobiles owned by military service members while they were abroad fighting for our country without the court orders required by federal law, and were slapped with a $24 million fine. That's according to CNN Money. Wells Fargo, again, is paying $190 million to settle a customer fraud case in which customers were pushed into fee-generating accounts that they never requested. That's according to CNBC of September 2016. It was just brought to light in the last few weeks. There's 1.43 million accounts that just appeared out of nowhere in that same period that I just described, that they forgot to talk to the media and the Department of Justice about, that they just found somewhere floating in space that were as a result of bad policy. Wells Fargo agreed to $50 million in home loan settlement arising from allegations that they bilked roughly 250,000 homeowners by padding appraisal fees. That's according to USA Today from October 2016. Wells Fargo again agreed to pay $1.2 billion with a B for improper mortgage lending practices. That's a Department of Justice lawsuit that went through the whole lawsuit and everything. Wells Fargo agreed to pay $175 million in a race discrimination probe in which the company charged African and Hispanic Americans higher rates and fees on mortgages. The Department of Justice also found 34,000 instances of charging higher fees and rates compared to white borrowers between 2004 and 2009. That's according to Reuters in 2012. Unless we change how we do business and who we do business with, nothing will change. If we can join forces with a lot of other communities across the country and individuals who decide whether or not to do business with this company, that what they have done is wrong, that sends a clear message that what they do is not acceptable and will not be acceptable going forward. If we don't stand for this, we shouldn't stand for anything. This is as simple and easy a thing for us to do, in my mind. I advocated that we change the whole framework in which we do investments. Unfortunately, though, it became quite an interesting discussion that led to nothing happening in that area. But I'm okay with this, because this does send a clear message that we are St. Peter. We're kind of like Mayberry in a way. I still think that way, and that's part of the reason why I live here. But at the end of the day, justice still needs to be met out where there's injustice. I respect, Jerry, what you have to say and all that you stand for, but tonight I can't agree to that. Like you said, this doesn't mean a lot for St. Peter, so this should have little effect on what we do. But what it will do is it'll send a message to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation of St. Peterites down the road that we stood for something, that we joined forces with other communities that also felt the same way, and we are consumers in a way because we put our money in these bank accounts that demand change. That's fair for everybody. These things are not appropriate. So this is why I'm going to support this tonight.
Anyone else? John?
The now therefore in the resolution says that we will make no further investment with Wells Fargo and related companies without additional consideration by the city council. I'm a little uncomfortable with the indefiniteness of that for two reasons. One is that we have a fiduciary responsibility to our constituents, to our taxpayers, to get the best deal we can. So this should be looked at some point. This doesn't say when that is. The second point is, if we were to say, for instance, that we will make no further investments with them for a year, that gives us an opportunity in a year to again make a public statement. And it's the public statement that has the value, I think, rather than the not making the investment. So I'd like to modify the resolution so that it says we'll make no further investments with Wells Fargo and related companies for a year. And the council will review it at that time.
Comments? Questions? I agree with you, John. I think a year might be a little short. I almost go for 2 years.
Well, it's reviewing it and making a public statement that has the value.
Okay.
That's why I like
I
doing
can,
it.
I can live with it either way.
I do it every 6 months. If, it's just so it's in the paper. Once
day.
again,
Every day.
we don't like Wells Fargo.
Any comments on that?
I hadn't noticed this, or I hadn't really contemplated this language until John just brought it up, but what do we mean by related companies? Do we have a definition of what that means?
We do have a definition of what that means, I think, certainly not as a part of this, but we understand what are investment subsidiaries of Wells Fargo, and there are a number of them. I can't list them all off right now, I'm sorry, but there are a number.
There's a master list that we would consult. Alrighty.
Steve?
I tend to agree with you, Mr. Mayor, and I understand Mr. Brandt's position, and I agree with it. And I think that we need to give, by all these smaller entities, larger entities, giving them a message to say you need to turn around your business and make things right. Then at that point, people will maybe look back to putting money back into the company. So I think it's still, I don't want to make it a debt.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, the resolution directing divestment of funds from Wells Fargo and Company appears on page 110. Is there a motion for approval, John?
I'll move the modified resolution.
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, clarification
okay.
for what amount of time? 1 year?
To 1 year, and then the council will address this again at that time.
Okay, sorry.
For 1 year, I won't support that, sorry.
Okay,
I'll second that.
a second there, all right. Any other questions or comments? Jeff?
1 year doesn't really say much, this is just symbolic then. In 1 year, they could still be found guilty of many, many crimes.
And we review it, and once again, it's in the paper that you haven't changed, we're going to do it, continue it. for
Well,
another
in
year.
1 year, if it's a different makeup of people that just don't care, then what have we really done tonight?
Well, then we shouldn't be tying their hands if that isn't what they want to do.
Well, I feel like there should be some sort of a period of time for where they can clean up their act and get a proper policy in order for that company. I still feel like they're found guilty of things or being charged with crimes. And so, in my opinion, the fallout hasn't stopped. And who knows what else they're going to be found guilty of because they're just now remembering about 1.43 million accounts that they fictitiously created. And so unless it's longer, I can't support it.
Yeah, well, I see your point, Jeff, but I do see John's point of bringing it up, and then the future, a year from now, whoever is here, then they can hopefully continue it on based off of this, but, it's something that I think it's warranted that, like John had said, that, the papers or whoever, will be presenting this every year. That's my thought anyway. Any other questions or any comments or questions? Otherwise, the resolution has been made with modifications and seconded. Call the roll, please, Bart.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Quinn.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Nay.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
I mean, as it stands right now, we're talking about taking 2 maturity date divestments from this list.
Right.
And I feel that that is not what we're even doing tonight, and so nay.
Councilmember Carlton.
Aye.
Resolution passes with amendment by 4-2. Next up, we have the MnDOT. No, excuse me, we have a revolving loan request for River Rock Coffee.
Mayor Zeman, members of the City Council, you have an application from Azure Sky LLC, which is a real estate holding company formed by Tamika Bertram. Tamika owns 100% of that company, is the sole owner. Azure Sky has purchased the 301 and the 303 South Minnesota Avenue properties from Sweat Equity. That is the home of River Rock Coffee at 301, Sticks and Stones at 303, and then there are 3 residential apartment units on the 2nd floor above those buildings. At this point, Ms. Bertram, on behalf of Azure Sky, has requested approval of a $25,000 loan from the Central Business District Accessibility Enhancement Loan Program that you'd recently created. The total project cost had been quoted at $41,828, so she would be eligible for the full $25,000. The window, door replacement, the roof repairs, the tuck pointing, the painting of the facade, and the signage were all approved by the HPC, and the building is 100% accessible. As the ADA considered this, a subcommittee was established to review Ms. Bertram's personal financial information, as well as in the cash flows of Azure Sky, which is a relatively new company. The EDA subcommittee has reported that there's no irregularities or any concerns, and that if approved, Ms. Bertram's personal guarantee would have a value. They also took into consideration that Ms. Bertram received a $25,000 loan in 2002 to help purchase the River Rock assets. That loan was repaid as scheduled, in the amount scheduled, and on the day schedule without a single exception. They also considered that in 2002, Ms. Bertram was awarded a $6,000 loan from the Construction Mitigation Micro Loan Program, and then she had paid that off as due, when due, and always in the amount due, again without a single exception. After their review, the EDA has recommended that you approve a loan of $25,000 from the CBD Accessibility Enhancement Loan. That loan would be established at 0% as per policy. It would be collateralized by a personal guarantee executed by Ms. Bertram. It would be subject to a subordinate mortgage. At this point, Nicollet County Bank has a mortgage filed against the 2 properties in combination in the amount of $394,000. A appraisal done within the last 6 months by Appraisal Services has established a value of $500,000. So there would be plenty of room to park the $25,000 into a meaningful subordinate mortgage, and then the policy would require that Ms. Bertram and Azure Sky list the city as a loss payee on their real estate insurance policy in an amount at least equal to the outstanding principal of her loan. Mayor Zeman, that's my report, and I'd gladly answer any questions you or the council members may have.
Question? Comment? John?
I have a question. I'm going from memory here. I thought the EDA policy was that the insurance policy was for the replacement value of the property rather than the outstanding balance of the loan.
Well, I mean, yes, they'll have property on the entire property, but we're only eligible to receive in payment what we have outstanding on our principals. So if they have a $4 million insurance policy, we're still only going to get $25,000 to pay off our loan.
So the policy isn't in the amount equal to at least the outstanding balance of the loan, which is the way I read that statement.
Okay, that was not the intent. The intent would be that she has a real estate insurance, and that we're listed as a loss payee behind the bank.
Okay. Could you find some clearer wording?
We can fix that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions, comments? The EDA addressed this. It was a unanimous decision. I was there. It was.
It passed. I don't
Yes,
keep track usually.
it was.
They pass or they don't.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? If not, the resolution approving a $25,000 Central Business District Accessibility Enhancement Revolving Loan to Azure Sky appears on page 113. Is there a motion? And 14.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Mark.
Councilmember Clement.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Mayor Ziegler.
Aye. Resolution passes. Next up, we have the MnDOT Highway 169 project detour agreement. Todd.
Mayor, members, this information starts on page 119 in your packet. And just to be clear, the situation related to what DOT is doing on Highway 169 is dramatically different than the last time they requested a detour through this area. And so let me go to the map if I can right away after I explain that the agreement provides for a 32-day window where traffic using Highway 169 and then Highway 22, or using Highway 22 going to the east to utilize Highway 169 south would be utilized. So this map indicates in the black here, you'll see an area right next to Daniel Center, Anytime Fitness, the old Ford garage. When that is under construction, that's the time at which the detour would be in place. And so traffic that was going to continue to move north or south on 169 would continue on 169. This is only during the time where that intersection was being overlaid and there's some elevation work that's going to take place in relation to that intersection. So this would only occur to a maximum of 32 days for traffic that either is originating from the west on Highway 22, then entering onto 169 via Old Minnesota Avenue and St. Julian, or traffic that is going north on Highway 169. Well, I guess they could be going south on 169 too, and they want to go west on Highway 22. So it's dramatically different than what you've seen in the past. The reason we enter agreements like this is because it creates an opportunity for you to get some revenue on a roadway that's going to be used more heavily than it had in the past. But again, this will only be traffic that really currently creates traffic count on Highway 22, not Highway 169, only on Highway 22 going east or west. Additional information is included in your packet, and we've had some discussions certainly with DOT, and you see their request to Pete as a part of this, and the agreement included in your packet. I'm happy to answer questions as best I can, but the resolution is included in your packet on page 132.
Jeff.
Where's the list telling me what stop signs are being changed in this?
There is not a list that tells you what stop signs are being changed. Let me get to the right page. There is a listing here, or a map on page 131 that indicates signage that would be put in place both on Highway 169 and Old Minnesota Avenue that provides for the detour. Stop signs in this instance would not be changed at all. It would still be a stop condition. So let me use the map as an example. If you were driving on Highway 169 and wanted to go west on Highway 22, there would be a stop condition at the intersection of St. Julian and Old Minnesota. There would be a stop condition at the intersection of Minnesota Highway 22 and Old Minnesota at the north end near where the black bar is. And so there's not a change anticipated in the stop conditions along this roadway.
And then how many people drive on 169 per day?
Again, this would not impact folks that are driving along 169. This would only impact folks that are driving or intending to drive on Highway 22. This is only for the intersection. It's not 169 traffic.
I'm sorry,
169 traffic will continue on 169.
I meant 22, sorry. How many people travel on 22 per day?
I don't have a traffic count. I can look that up for you, but I don't know that one off the top of my head.
I just feel like this is the exact same type of a rushed agreement as we had last time. And as a result of that, there was a death, there was a fatality on 22 and coming on 20. And I told the public then the same thing I'm about to say now. Unless I see a retraffic condition, I am not going to support this. And so what I'd like to see tonight is we table that until we can see every traffic condition laid out ahead of time.
Well,
So I can feel safe from the public safety standpoint.
But in this situation, we're not changing stop signs, are we not?
correct. There is no
It's
change in the
just
traffic regulations.
Access is all we're changing. Where on Highway 20, that's the error to me that they made there, was they changed the stop, which side stopped and which didn't. This here is just, all it is just routing the access like you would if it wasn't there. I mean, it's still an inconvenience for maybe more for people, but I don't think as you access it, it's not gonna change the way you would access it at this location.
And I feel comfortable with you both saying it, but I want to hear it from them, frankly. And I would vote to table this until we see that in writing. I think they have enough time to produce that for us, to make us feel at ease about the public safety aspect of this.
If I can, just for remembrance to the city council, what happened previously was not the recommendation of staff or DOT. The council didn't enter into the agreement with DOT and asked them to change locations, and then it was changed to Highway 20.
Any other questions or comments?
Doesn't the map on 131 tell us what the signage is going to be?
It tells you what the signage is going to be along Highway 169 and along Minnesota Avenue, Highway 22, and what they call the detour. And I guess what I'm telling you is that there'll be additional detour signs, but there's no traffic condition signs that will change. So there's not additional stop signs or fewer stop signs or anything like that.
So what beyond this map would you be looking for?
I want them to confirm exactly what Todd and the mayor said tonight.
That's what page 131 says.
And that's what the agreement says. Page 130 provides a map as well that shows the intersection at St. Julian. And again, lists out on Highway 169 the type of, I don't want to say regulatory signage, but directional and wayfinding signage that would be modified during the course of the detour and the work that's going on. Again, the detour is anticipated to be not more than 32 days.
Susie?
So this would be akin to the signs that we have on 169 right now, advising people of alternate access to Jake's Pizza, for instance. Not talking about the bridge closure component of it, but under normal operating conditions, there is more than one way to get to Jake's Pizza. Most people use 169 and 99 to get there. During this detour, we're encouraging people to go towards Front Street to access Jake's Pizza, right?
Yes.
So this is the same thing. Normally, people would utilize that intersection of 22 and 169 in a particular way to get to these businesses. We're encouraging them to basically use the back road instead.
I think that's accurate. Frankly, I would describe it slightly differently in that this isn't necessarily to bring the traffic past those businesses. It is really to allow traffic to go east and west and intersect with Highway 169.
Okay.
It happens to provide access to the rear of those businesses, which in some instances, that's where their best access or only access point is.
Jeff?
To point out, the illustrations on page 130 and 131 are only for 169. I don't see anything regarding Old Minnesota Avenue on those two illustrations.
Actually, if I can, on page 131 specifically, about halfway through the page, and I can come over and show you on the map. I'm sorry they're not included on my PowerPoint presentation. You'll see a sign that says, "To North Minnesota Highway 22," and it directs people to go straight ahead. You'll see another sign further north that directs them that there will be an upcoming left-hand or westerly turn. You will see at the intersection of Highway 169 and Old Minnesota Avenue a sign that says, "To North Highway 22," directing folks west. On Highway 22, moving traffic from the west to the east, you'd see a sign that says "Road Work Ahead," and that then conversely directs traffic southward on Old Minnesota Avenue on the detour. You'll see on page 130 that there's signage that provides for, again, directing people north to Highway 22 or south on Highway 169, road work ahead, Treaty Site History Center, some additional wayfinding signage that would be along Old Minnesota Avenue.
Again, I haven't heard a stop sign presented in that illustration.
Yeah, there is not a stop sign presented because the stop signs are there currently. There would not be, as I mentioned earlier, there would not be additional stop signs, nor would the stop signs be removed. It does not indicate on the map that stop signs would be removed, therefore stop signs would not be removed.
Other comments? Did you still want to motion to table?
Yes.
There's a motion to table this for further discussion. Is there a second? Motion is not supported. We will therefore move to the resolution authorizing execution of a detour agreement with Minnesota Department of Transportation for 2018 Trunk Highway project. Appears on page 132. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Is there a
Second.
second? Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Call the roll, please, Bart.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Brand.
Nay.
Councilmember Cullen.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Resolution passes by a vote of 5-1. Next up, we have the MMUA Safety Program Renewal.
Mayor, members, Pete is sorry that he's not here tonight, so let me cover this one as best as I can. The information starts in your packet on page 115. This is a program that you've been involved with for around 20 years now and provides a number of different services to your city staff and to your community. Let me rephrase that. It's mostly to your city staff. We're not providing safety training to the community overall, so it's the city staff. The cost for this anticipated in the upcoming year is about $28,700, and for that we get the services of a person that provides training, does the certification, manages the safety committee, and helps review buildings, and as you may recall, assists us at the time when we have OSHA inspections as well, which has been proven to be very, very useful. One thing about proof being in the pudding is that traditionally here, for the last number of years, your experience modification on work comp costs has been less than 1. So that means that you are lower than the average city that has the level of work and the type of work that's performed for injuries that are on the job. You would be part of a consortium that contracts for the services from MMUA, and at times the number of folks that we've participated with has varied from as low as 6 to as high as 9. This is somewhere in the middle, and provides the kind of services that we would expect to see provided as a part of the work that's ongoing. In addition to management of the safety committee, doing the inspection things as we've talked about, doing the training as we've talked about, we're also able to use Chris and the MMUA as a resource on questions that we have that vary all the way from, boy, do we really need to have somebody sign a piece of paper if they're a lifeguard and they really don't want to have the bloodborne pathogen hepatitis C shot and all of those kind of things. So it's really nice to have an expert that we can go to that can answer a lot of those questions for us that are frankly beyond our scope a large majority of the time. The program, again, has been in place for about 20 years, and the contract itself and the modification of the contract is on page 117 with a resolution approving and authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into the contract on 118. Again, the cost would be about $28,729.66 for a period of October 1st of this year through the end of September in 2018, so a year.
For those that were confused, we're bouncing back and forth in our packet.
No, I'm more confused by the dollar figure on 117 being different than the dollar figure on 118.
You know, John, I'm very confident
That one of them is right?
yes. If that's a significant issue for you, I can go back and
Well,
review.
it's $3,000. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it the lineman difference?
That might be right. We do have an additional payment for specialized training related to electrical linemen, and typically that's around $3,000 or $4,000. So although it's not, you have one more meeting with which to explore this if you're concerned about having the exact correct information on that. If not, I could email you at a later date and clarify. It certainly would be at the pleasure of the council.
Well, we should be doing the contract. We should be doing it for whatever it is they want, because
Yep.
it's been a wonderful thing for us and saved us thousands.
Yes.
I don't care which number it is, just got to choose one.
If you would give me latitude, if you approve it and give me latitude to look up the appropriate number, and you pass it so that MMUA can feel good that they're moving forward and we're not kind of at the last second, I'll provide that information appropriately for them.
How about if we amend the resolution to up to, but not exceeding 28,700, whatever it is here.
We sure can do that.
$729.66.
We sure can do that.
I'll move the modified resolution.
I'll second that modified resolution.
Any other questions or comments?
Can you clarify for me what the modified resolution is?
I will.
Okay.
On section 1, we'll get that covered.
Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, you know, we use the title, at least of the resolution,
Right.
that the person provides safety coordinator services to assist. What else does that mean? You mentioned the word buildings. What does that mean when you say buildings? Do they check fire extinguishers, or what do you mean by that?
No, that person wouldn't necessarily check fire extinguishers, but let me use a different example, if I may, than fire extinguishers. They have expertise in knowing what OSHA is looking for with safety components within buildings. So that could be something, is the eye wash station appropriately at the appropriate height, as an example. And so those are the kind of things. I don't want to overemphasize that because that's not a majority of the work. A majority of the work is the safety programming and the training that takes place for our employees. A minority of the work is inspection of buildings and doing that kind of stuff.
So then, I mean, just to point of clarity, who checks the fire extinguishers? Just out of
Actually, we have
curiosity.
people from the safety committee that are assigned on a rotating basis to check the fire
Okay.
extinguishers for us, sure.
I was just thinking Mr. Mayor could do that.
I could.
Sorry.
And thing you pointed out, Steve, MMUA is Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association, if it wasn't mentioned before. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Curran?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Clayton?
Aye.
Councilmember Craig?
Aye.
Resolution passes. Last item of new business tonight is the PALS Program Health Assessment Contract. And Jane is here tonight.
Good evening, Mayor and members. I got kind of cold earlier. Had to get something else. Sorry for having it so cold in here, but hopefully it keeps you awake, right? I just want to go over what we talked about a couple of weeks ago at your workshop when we reviewed the purchase for services agreement with Nicollet County to provide assessments for our members that are in our Partners in Active Living program for seniors. At that time, there was a request for me to check into other possible vendors to provide the service for the assessments that are required for this particular evidence-based program. I did check with Rivers Edge Hospital and Clinic, and after a couple of conversations and back and forth, they made a decision to not pursue it. They didn't feel like they had the staff or the time to make this happen. So at this point, I am coming back to you with a recommendation to be able to enter into this contract with Nicollet County to provide those assessments at $25 per assessment. Generally, they are for people that are first-time visitors to the program, get a health assessment, make sure that they are in good shape to be able to follow through with the program. Nicollet County would coordinate with their medical provider on a confidential basis. Medical provider is involved with ongoing, any concerns, that kind of stuff. So those two things are very important to us, I think, as part of our program. And then as not necessarily on an annual basis, but every so often, then those assessments would be taken again because this is an evidence-based program. We want to show that the program that we're offering is making a difference in the lives of our older adults. Their flexibilities improve, the strength is, their cardiac ability, so that we are seeing results, and it is a strong program that we offer with a certified instructor. So I am requesting that you would approve us entering into a contract with Nicollet County to provide those services for us on an ongoing basis. There is a 30-day opt-out agreement, and at any point, either one of us would want to discontinue the services. And any questions?
Question, Steve?
I have two, Jane.
Yes.
Have you ever had any person that's gone through this assessment not passed and not been allowed to participate in this program?
We have not.
Okay. And the second thing is, it's called PALS, Partners in Active Living for Seniors. What's the definition of a senior?
Really, there isn't any tried or true definition on this. I think it's just a general term.
Could it be open to anybody?
It really could be.
Okay. All
Yes.
right. Thank you.
Anyone else? Jeff?
What happened with the discussion? I know we talked about this before about involving River's Edge instead of the county nurse.
That's what I just said. I talked with them and they declined.
They don't even. I mean, they don't even. They offer that to the public for students and things like that want to go to school, but they don't want to. They don't want to be a part of this for people who want to be part of the PALS program.
I think they just don't have the, as we get new people in this program, I think they just probably don't have the time or the personnel
Okay.
to make those assessments happen. And frankly, I don't know that they can do it for this price either.
Okay. Well, that's fair.
I think that was one of the other caveats that they indicated. So
Okay.
they, at this point, respectfully denied their involvement.
Good to know we're getting a good deal, and then
That's
that
right. I
we're
think it's a
still able to
very
take care
fair
of these
deal.
folks.
Yeah,
Good.
it's very fair.
And as a point of clarification, I don't believe that Rivers Edge Hospital currently offers physicals for students and so forth, not as a service of the Rivers Edge Hospital itself. That would be,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anybody know for sure?
I don't know the answer.
That's what they requested.
But the frequency of these assessments being made is very, very low.
Very
folks.
low.
We're
If you-
talking a couple dozen a year, maybe at the maximum.
Right. Since January, I think there have been 9 new people. There's a total of 43 people on our list. They don't all, they participate every time. They may be going south for vacation or different things come up that they can't participate. But yeah, we haven't had anybody new. I think July was the last new person we had. So the same people usually continue to take the class.
I see.
Yeah.
Any other? Steve?
Yes.
Just as a point of clarification, Ms. Garland, these aren't physicals, they're health assessments. There's a big difference between
Right.
a physical and health.
I said that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I've seen.
in either case, Rivers Edge Hospital, I don't believe provides health assessments either.
I'm not sure, with the Live Well program that they have, I don't know if they do something with that or not.
Okay.
All right.
If
I
there's-
could be wrong.
Whoops, sorry. If there's no other questions or comments, the resolution authorizing execution of a contract with Nicollet County Public Health for PALS program, health assessments, appears on page 139. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Brand.
Aye.
Councilmember Harlan.
Aye.
Mayor Zine.
Aye.
Councilmember Cormier.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Grams.
Aye.
Resolution passes. That concludes our new business. Thank you, Jane. Next up, we have reports. Myself, I haven't heard any numbers on the Rock Bend Festival from the weekend, but if people and number of cars equates to success, it was very successful. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of going to an open house to meet St. Peter's Princess K of the Milky Way, Miss Emily Annexted, and we are fortunate to have such a well-spoken and representative from our community. Other than that, that is all I have.
Mayor members, you've been here for quite a long time, so let me jump to the chase. There's a Minnesota River Valley Transit meeting on Wednesday, the 13th at 2:30 p.m. at the LeSueur City Hall in their council chambers. So I want to make you all aware of that and make sure the public's aware of that as well. Under hurricane disaster assistance, we've got a couple of things going on that are in place. First of all, we have been contacted by the Texas League of Cities Insurance Pool and solicited some information on disaster response and how to work with FEMA and a number of other things, which is always interesting to have people communicate with us and contact us and ask us for advice on what's going on. We also have a bake sale going on with city employees to raise some money, and there's been some groups that are affiliated with the city. I think the Pfeffer Club raised about $100 to send to the Red Cross and some really cool things like that. So the community, I think, to a large extent, still feels the want and the passion to, I don't know whether it's pay forward or pay back for all the assistance that we got in the aftermath of the tornado. So some very interesting things that are going on.
What's Pfeffer?
Theffer is a type of card game
Oh,
that is
okay.
akin to cribbage, I guess, or something. Yeah, some type of card game. Yeah,
Okay.
okay, but thank you. I don't know, John, it's not 21, so it's outside of my, I just don't play cards.
I thought you said Pepper first.
Oh,
but-
Pepper,
I was
no,
wondering if
Theffer.
Mr. Pfeiffer is an honorary member.
I used to be, but not anymore.
Not anymore?
Um,
Sorry, Ted.
No, that's okay. Lastly, I'd like to mention the Amoresco project. As you know, the council passed a resolution at your last council meeting indicating that you would enter into a contract with Amoresco, and that's still in place, but that you would execute on financing at this meeting. Because of a timeline constraint related to your bond counsel having the ability to review all the documentation, that's been pushed to your next meeting. So I wanted to make you aware of that. It's not that we don't want to comply with what your resolution was. We thought we had the timeline appropriate, but it'll come back at your next council meeting, which will be on the, let me think, 25th. So I wanted you to be aware of that and not just let it float past. Mayor members, that's all that I have for you for tonight.
All right. Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.